Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Friedman, sitting in the studio for Jeffrey Davis, who's on assignment. And in the studio with us today, we have an old friend. It's been a long time. We have Elise Busny from Pinkham Busny. Elise, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Jonathan.
It's been a while.
It has been a long time.
So
It's
tell
always
us.
a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. And I know that I know that you started your firm several years ago. I remember distinctly being at some charitable function and talking about your new firm.
Yep.
But why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about you guys and what you
Sure.
do?
Thanks. So Pinkham Busny was formed about 3.5 years ago. My partner, Margaret Pinkham, and I worked together at one of the big Boston firms for at least 15 years, doing
Now you're
similar...
dating yourself.
Right, I know, unfortunately. Doing similar type work, general commercial litigation and employment law. And we decided about 3.5 years ago that it was time for us to move on, to be able to continue to do the work that we really enjoy doing, which was representing companies, representing individuals with employment situations, and doing, general commercial litigation that would allow us to be in court on a regular basis and really litigate these types of cases. And the way the bigger firms were moving, we just weren't able to do that anymore there. So we left and started our own firm, and knock on wood, it's all going well.
Decided to take the entrepreneurial route, and now have to worry about all those things that entrepreneurs deal with on a day-to-day
Right.
basis.
It's funny. I don't feel like an entrepreneur being a lawyer starting a law firm. There's nothing that creative about it, but yes.
Don't worry about cash flow now.
Absolutely. There's a lot more to worry about, keeping your eye on a lot of things that we just never even thought about before.
Great. So you talked about general commercial litigation, employment law. Tips for entrepreneurs out there, things to look for as they're starting a business, hiring employees, growing their companies. Trials and tribulations, things to look out for? Any tips?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we do advise a lot of small companies starting out, and there are always things that you need to keep in mind when you're starting a new firm. And the biggest one in Massachusetts these days, because it's one of the most strict statutes in the entire country, is the Wage Act. And you've got to pay your employees. You've got to make sure that you pay your employees on time. You've got to comply with the statute, because if you don't, as the president, treasurer, or other person in charge of payroll at your company, you might have personal liability.
So let's break that down. I mean, it sounds rather obvious. You've got to pay your employees.
Sure.
That'll quid pro quo. I work for you, you pay me.
Absolutely.
But in practice, there are certainly challenges, especially in fledgling companies, companies that are starting out, cash flow issues. We've all seen or heard, and hopefully not experienced directly, but the company that says, listen, we can't pay you this week, but we'll get you next week.
Yeah, don't do
So
it.
technically violating the code. So,
Yes.
What is an employer to do? Fine. Don't start the company until you've got the means to be able to hire employees, or...
Well, don't hire employees until you have the means to pay them. So it used to be when it was in the early 90s and a lot of companies were starting in the tech boom, a lot of companies would enter into agreements with employees to offer them stock or other equity in the
Deferred
company
compensation.
and deferred compensation, and say, this is going to be your salary when we're able to pay it, but until we can pay it, you agree that we don't have to pay you. And of course, in a lot of those situations, they never were able to pay them. And so those employees sued their employers under the Wage Act, and they won, because you can't enter into any special contracts under the Massachusetts Wage Act that would allow you to not pay wages to your employees. And so you do have to be very careful if you're starting a new company and you're hiring employees that you are able to pay them. And wages really need to take precedence over even just regular day-to-day expenses of the company, because those expenses aren't going to subject you to personal liability or multiple damages. It's mandatory treble damages under the Wage Act if you're found liable, and attorney's fees. So it's very strict.
And